Cole Whitaker's massive frame filled the doorway as he watched the traveling nurse kneel beside his injured nephew, her gentle hands working magic that no ranch medicine ever could. At 6'7", with shoulders broad enough to carry the world's troubles, Cole had raised 3 orphan children for 5 years, without asking for help from anyone. But as Sophie Hale's soft voice coaxed a genuine smile from 8-year-old Marcus for the first time in months, Cole felt something shift in his carefully guarded heart. He didn't know that this woman would challenge everything he believed about love, family, and the walls he'd built around his wounded soul. He didn't know that in just 2 weeks, she would force him to choose between the safe loneliness he'd cultivated and the terrifying possibility of letting someone close enough to matter. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Whitaker ranch as Cole guided his horse through the pasture where it all began. 5 years had passed since the stampede that claimed his brother Jake's life, leaving Cole to raise 3 children he barely knew how to comfort, let alone parent. The thundering hooves still echoed in his nightmares sometimes. The image of his younger brother disappearing beneath a sea of panicked cattle burned into his memory like a brand. Cole pulled his horse to a stop near the oak tree, where Jake used to read stories to his children during lazy summer afternoons. Marcus, now 8, had been only 3 when the accident happened. The boy barely remembered his father, but he carried Jake's stubborn streak and quick temper, like genetic souvenirs. Lily, 10 years old with her mother's golden curls, had appointed herself the little mother of the group, trying desperately to fill gaps that shouldn't exist in a child's world. And then there was Emma, the baby of the family at 6, who still sometimes called Cole Uncle Daddy, in a way that made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. The ranch sprawled across 1,500 acres of Montana grassland, inherited from their grandfather along with debts that kept Cole awake most nights calculating feed costs and veterinary bills. Jake had been the dreamer, always talking about expanding the operation, maybe starting a guest ranch for city folks wanting to play cowboy for a week. Cole had been the practical one, content to run cattle and horses the way their family had done for 3 generations. Now he was both dreamer and realist, guardian and provider, trying to keep his brother's vision alive while making sure 3 children had food on the table and clothes that fit. The sound of breaking glass from the direction of the house snapped Cole from his reverie. He spurred his horse into a gallop, his heart hammering with the familiar panic that came whenever he left the children alone for more than an hour. At 6'7" and 260 pounds, Cole moved with surprising grace as he swung down from his saddle and bounded up the porch steps 3 at a time. Inside the kitchen, he found Marcus sitting on the floor surrounded by the remnants of what had been Cole's coffee mug, blood seeping from a cut on the boy's palm. Lily stood frozen by the sink, her face pale with the particular terror that came from knowing you were responsible for something going wrong. Emma had disappeared entirely, probably hiding under her bed the way she did whenever trouble found their small family. What happened here? Cole kept his voice level as he knelt beside Marcus, his massive hands gentle as he examined the cut. The boy's lower lip trembled, but he met Cole's eyes with defiant determination. "I was trying to reach the cereal," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lily said I was too short, and I wanted to prove her wrong." The admission came with fresh tears that Marcus scrubbed away with his uninjured hand. Cole lifted Marcus onto the kitchen counter, his movements careful despite the urgency. The cut wasn't deep, but it would need proper cleaning and bandaging. As he reached for the first aid kit they kept in the kitchen drawer, Cole caught sight of Lily's stricken expression. "This isn't your fault, sweetheart," he told her, recognizing the guilt written across her features. "Sometimes, accidents just happen." But even as he spoke the words, Cole felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on his shoulders. Jake would have known exactly what to say to make Marcus feel brave, instead of foolish. Jake would have turned this moment into a story about cowboys who faced danger with courage, not shame. Cole could mend fences and birth calves and balance books that never seemed to add up right. But moments like these reminded him how unprepared he was for the daily navigation of childhood emotions. As he cleaned Marcus's cut and applied antibiotic ointment, Cole noticed something that made his stomach drop. The boy's left leg, the one that had been broken in a fall from the barn loft 6 months earlier, appeared to be causing him pain. Marcus kept shifting his weight, favoring his right side in a way that suggested the old injury wasn't healing as well as the doctor in town had hoped. "Marcus, how's your leg feeling these days?" Cole asked, trying to keep his tone casual as he wrapped gauze around the boy's palm. Marcus shrugged with the studied nonchalance that 8-year-olds perfected when they didn't want adults to worry. "It's fine." But Cole had been around enough injured animals to recognize the signs of ongoing pain. The way Marcus held himself, the subtle limp that appeared when he thought no one was watching, the reluctance to run and play with the same enthusiasm he'd shown before the accident. The local doctor, a well-meaning man in his 70s, had done his best with limited resources, but Cole was beginning to suspect that Marcus needed care beyond what their small town could provide. That afternoon, while the children napped, Cole sat at the kitchen table with a pile of medical bills and insurance forms that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The numbers swam before his eyes, each dollar amount a reminder of how far stretched their resources had become. Between the mortgage payments, the feed costs, and the everyday expenses of raising 3 children, there wasn't much left over for specialized medical care. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the contacts until he found Dr. Henderson's number. The conversation that followed confirmed Cole's worst fears. Marcus would likely need physical therapy, possibly surgery, if the bone hadn't set properly the first time. The nearest pediatric orthopedist was in Billings, a 3-hour drive each way, and the waiting list for appointments stretched into the next month. "There might be another option," Dr. Henderson said after a long pause. "There's a traveling nurse who's been making rounds through the rural areas, Sophie Hale. She's worked with orthopedic cases before, and she might be able to assess Marcus's situation without you having to make the trip to Billings right away." Cole wrote down the number with hands that trembled slightly. He'd spent 5 years learning to handle every crisis on his own, from midnight fevers to algebra homework that made his head spin. The idea of bringing a stranger into their carefully constructed world felt like inviting chaos, but Marcus's well-being trumped his own discomfort every time. That evening, as Cole helped Emma with her reading homework, while Lily practiced piano and Marcus built elaborate structures with his collection of toy horses, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was warm but professional, carrying a slight accent that Cole couldn't quite place. "Mr. Whitaker? This is Sophie Hale. Dr. Henderson gave me your information about your nephew's leg injury." Cole found himself straightening unconsciously, as if the woman could see him through the phone line. "Yes, ma'am. Marcus broke his leg about 6 months ago, and I'm concerned it's not healing right. I'd be happy to take a look at him," Sophie said. "I'm finishing up a case about 40 miles north of you tomorrow. I could swing by your ranch in the evening if that works for your schedule." The next day crawled by with the peculiar weight of anticipation. Cole found himself cleaning the house with more attention to detail than usual, telling himself it was simply good manners to tidy up before company arrived. The children picked up on his nervous energy, asking questions he couldn't really answer about why this nurse was coming and whether Marcus was sicker than they'd realized. "Is she going to take Marcus away?" Emma asked during dinner, her fork poised halfway to her mouth as she studied Cole's face for reassurance. "No, sweetheart," Cole said, reaching over to smooth a strand of hair from her forehead. "She's just going to look at his leg and maybe help it feel better." But privately, Cole harbored his own fears about what this visit might reveal. What if Marcus needed surgery they couldn't afford? What if the injury was worse than he'd realized, and he'd failed in his most basic responsibility as a guardian? The weight of 3 young lives depending on his decisions had never felt heavier. Sophie Hale arrived just as the sun was setting, her compact SUV kicking up dust as it navigated the long gravel driveway leading to the ranch house. Cole watched from the kitchen window as she gathered her medical bag and a smaller case from the back seat, moving with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to working in unfamiliar environments. When Cole opened the front door, he found himself looking down at a woman who barely reached his chest, but somehow managed to fill the doorway with presence. Sophie Hale was probably in her early 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore scrubs decorated with cartoon horses, a touch that immediately endeared her to Cole, even as he tried to maintain his usual reserve around strangers. "Mr. Whitaker?" Her handshake was firm, despite the size difference between them. "Thank you for letting me come out here tonight. I know it's not always easy having medical professionals in your home." Something in her tone suggested she understood the particular challenges of rural life, the way privacy and independence were valued sometimes, above convenience or even safety. Cole felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as he stepped aside to let her enter. "Please, call me Cole," he said, leading her into the living room where the children were arranged in a semicircle like they were about to receive instructions for a dangerous mission. "And this is Lily, Marcus, and Emma." Sophie knelt down to their eye level, a gesture that immediately caught Cole's attention. Most adults, especially medical professionals, towered over children in ways that could be intimidating. Sophie seemed to understand instinctively that meeting them where they were would make everything easier. "It's very nice to meet all of you," she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "Marcus, I hear you had some trouble with your leg a while back. Would it be okay if I took a look at it?" Marcus nodded solemnly, his earlier anxiety replaced by curiosity about this woman who talked to him like he was capable of making decisions about his own care. Cole watched as Sophie opened her medical bag and began explaining each instrument she planned to use, turning what could have been a frightening experience into something closer to a science lesson. As Sophie examined Marcus's leg, asking questions about pain levels and range of motion, Cole found himself studying her technique. She was thorough without being invasive, professional without being cold. When Marcus winced during a particular movement, she immediately stopped and asked if he wanted to take a break. When he insisted on continuing, she praised his bravery in a way that felt genuine rather than patronizing. "The good news is that the bone has healed," Sophie announced after completing her examination. "The bad news is that some scar tissue is formed around the break site, and that's what's causing the ongoing pain and stiffness." Cole felt his chest tighten with anxiety. "What does that mean for treatment?" Sophie settled back on her heels, including Marcus in the conversation rather than speaking over his head. "It means we need to work on breaking up that scar tissue through some targeted exercises and stretches. It's going to take time and consistency, but it shouldn't require surgery if we stay on top of it." The relief that washed over Cole was so intense he had to sit down. Surgery would have meant trips to specialists, hospital stays, bills that could threaten the ranch's survival. Physical therapy was something they could manage, even if it meant learning new routines and adding another layer of complexity to their daily schedule. "I can show you the exercises tonight and leave some instruction sheets," Sophie continued. "But this kind of therapy works best with regular monitoring, especially in the beginning. Would it be possible for me to check back in a week or so?" Cole found himself nodding before he'd fully considered the implications. Having Sophie return meant opening their world to ongoing scrutiny, admitting that he needed help with something he should be able to handle on his own. But as he watched Marcus's face light up with hope for the first time in months, Cole realized his pride was a small price to pay for his nephew's well-being. Over the next hour, Sophie transformed their living room into a makeshift therapy center, showing Cole and Lily how to help Marcus with his exercises, while Emma appointed herself the official cheerleader. Sophie's presence seemed to energize the entire household in ways Cole hadn't expected. She asked Lily about school and complimented Emma's drawings that covered the refrigerator. She listened to Marcus's elaborate stories about the ranch animals, with the kind of attention that made the boy glow with pride. As Sophie packed up her equipment, Cole walked her out to her car, the Montana evening settling around them with the particular quiet that came after a day well lived. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, and Cole found himself reluctant to end the first adult conversation he'd enjoyed in longer than he cared to admit. "Thank you for coming out here," he said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets against the evening chill. "I know house calls aren't exactly standard practice anymore." Sophie smiled, and Cole noticed for the first time the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was genuinely amused. "One of the benefits of being a traveling nurse is that I get to decide what standard practice looks like. Besides, some situations work better when families can stay in their own environment." There was something in her tone that suggested personal experience with the challenges of navigating medical care in rural communities. Cole wanted to ask about her background, to understand what had brought her to this unconventional career path, but he wasn't sure he had the right to such personal questions. "I'll be back next week," Sophie said as she opened her car door. "Same time work for you?" "That'd be fine," Cole replied, though fine seemed like an inadequate word for how much he was already looking forward to a return visit. As Sophie's taillights disappeared down the driveway, Cole stood on his porch for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and trying to understand why the house felt different now. Something had shifted during those few hours. Some tearfully maintained balance had been disturbed in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Inside, he found the children still energized by Sophie's visit, chattering about the exercises they'd learned and the stories she'd shared about other families she'd worked with. Marcus demonstrated his new stretches with enthusiasm that Cole hadn't seen since before the accident, and even Emma had incorporated some of Sophie's medical terminology into her bedtime routine. That night, as Cole tucked each child into bed with the familiar rituals that had evolved over 5 years of trial and error, he found himself thinking about Sophie's easy way with them. She'd managed to be both professional and personal, maintaining appropriate boundaries while still connecting with each child individually. It was a skill Cole envied, this ability to read people quickly and respond to their unspoken needs. The week that followed passed with unusual anticipation threading through their daily routines. Marcus diligently performed his exercises twice a day, with Lily keeping track of repetitions in a notebook she designated as his medical chart. Emma had decided that she wanted to be a nurse when she grew up and had begun bandaging her dolls with scraps of cloth torn from old sheets. Cole found himself paying more attention to the house's appearance, fixing a squeaky hinge on the screen door and replacing the burnt-out bulb in the front porch light. He told himself these were simply maintenance tasks that had been too long delayed, but he knew his motivation ran deeper than simple upkeep. When Sophie returned the following week, she brought a small gift for each child. Nothing elaborate but thoughtful enough to show she'd been thinking about them between visits. For Marcus, she had a rubber ball designed for grip-strengthening exercises that could double as a toy. Lily received a junior nurse's kit complete with a toy stethoscope and blood pressure cuff. Emma's present was a picture book about a girl who wanted to be a veterinarian, which sent the 6-year-old into raptures of delight. "You didn't need to do that," Cole said, as he watched the children explore their gifts with the kind of joy that had been rare in their household lately. "I know," Sophie replied simply, "but I wanted to." During Marcus's examination, Sophie noted significant improvement in his flexibility and a reduction in the pain he'd been experiencing. She adjusted his exercise routine to include more challenging movements and taught Cole how to perform basic massage techniques that would help break up the remaining scar tissue. After the medical portion of the visit concluded, Sophie accepted Cole's invitation to stay for dinner, a suggestion that had surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. They sat around the kitchen table that Jake had built during his woodworking phase, sharing a meal of pot roast and vegetables that Cole had learned to cook through necessity rather than natural talent. The conversation flowed more easily than Cole had expected, ranging from ranch life to Sophie's experiences traveling between small communities across the state. She had grown up in a town similar to theirs, she told them, before pursuing nursing school in Denver and eventually finding her calling in rural healthcare. "What made you want to do traveling nursing?" Lily asked, her 10-year-old curiosity getting the better of her usual shyness around new adults. Sophie considered the question seriously, treating Lily's inquiry with the same respect she might give an adult's question. "I realized that a lot of families in small towns don't have easy access to specialized medical care. Sometimes a little bit of knowledge and attention can make a huge difference in someone's quality of life." Cole found himself studying Sophie's face as she spoke, noting the passion that lit up her features when she talked about her work. There was a sense of mission in her words that went beyond simple career satisfaction. A genuine commitment to serving people who might otherwise fall through the cracks of the healthcare system. After dinner, while the children worked on homework at the kitchen table, Cole and Sophie stepped out onto the front porch to watch the sunset over the mountains. The evening air carried the scent of hay and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night. "This is beautiful country," Sophie said. settling into one of the wooden chairs that Cole had built during the long winter evenings when the children were asleep and his hands needed something to do. "It's home," Cole replied, though the word carried more weight than usual. Home had become a more complicated concept since Jake's death, encompassing not just a place but a responsibility that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky change colors as the day surrendered to night. Cole couldn't remember the last time he'd shared such a peaceful moment with another adult, someone who didn't need anything from him except the simple pleasure of his company. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie's voice was soft, almost tentative. "How long have you been raising the children on your own?" The question opened a door Cole usually kept carefully locked, but something in Sophie's tone made him want to answer honestly. 5 years this fall. Their parents died in a cattle stampede. Jake was my younger brother. Sophie turned in her chair to face him more fully, her expression conveying sympathy without the pity that Cole had learned to dread. "That must have been incredibly difficult, taking on 3 young children while dealing with your own grief." Cole felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of emotion he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "I'm not sure I've done right by them," he admitted, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Jake was the one who was good with kids. I'm just trying not to mess them up too badly." "From what I can see, you're doing an amazing job," Sophie said firmly. "Those children are happy, healthy, and clearly loved. That doesn't happen by accident." The simple validation hit Cole harder than he'd expected. For 5 years, he'd been operating without a roadmap, making decisions based on instinct and hope rather than any real knowledge of child development or family dynamics. To hear someone whose professional experience included working with families across the region affirm his efforts felt like permission to believe that maybe he wasn't failing as completely as he sometimes feared. When Sophie left that night, she mentioned that she'd be in the area for several more weeks, working with families in neighboring towns. The possibility of regular visits seemed to hang in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Cole found himself hoping she'd find reasons to continue checking on Marcus's progress, even as he questioned his motivations for wanting her to return. Over the following weeks, Sophie's visits became a highlight that the entire family looked forward to. She usually arrived in the early evening, timed to coincide with dinner and the children's homework hour. Marcus's exercises had become so routine that he no longer needed supervision, but Sophie continued to monitor his progress and adjust his routine as his strength and flexibility improved. More than the medical care, though, Sophie brought something to their household that Cole hadn't realized they'd been missing. She had a gift for drawing out each child's personality, encouraging Lily's natural leadership abilities, while helping Hema channel her boundless energy into constructive activities. With Marcus, she struck the perfect balance between challenging him to work hard on his recovery, while never making him feel like his worth was tied to his physical capabilities. For Cole, Sophie's presence offered something even more precious: adult conversation with someone who seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts and opinions. She asked about the ranch operation with real curiosity, listening to his explanations of cattle breeding and land management, with the kind of attention that made him remember why he'd fallen in love with this life in the first place. One evening in late summer, after Marcus had been declared fully recovered and released from his exercise routine, Sophie lingered longer than usual after dinner. The children had been excused to play outside, their laughter drifting through the open windows as they chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I have something to tell you," Sophie said, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold while they talked. "I've been offered a permanent position at the hospital in Billings. It would mean giving up the traveling work." Cole felt his stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee he'd been drinking. He set down his own mug carefully, buying himself time to process this information and its implications for their family. That's great," he managed, though the words felt like sawdust in his mouth. "More stable work. Better benefits, probably." Sophie nodded, but her expression was troubled rather than excited. "It would be a good career move," she agreed. "But I'd miss this. The families, the freedom to really spend time with patients instead of rushing through appointments." Cole wanted to tell her that they'd miss her too, that her absence would leave a hole in their carefully reconstructed life, that he wasn't sure how to fill. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by 5 years of learning to handle disappointment and loss without complaint. "When would you need to decide?" he asked instead, his voice carefully neutral. "They want an answer by the end of the month," Sophie said. "I've been going back and forth about it for weeks." That night, after Sophie had gone and the children were asleep, Cole sat on his front porch and tried to untangle the emotions her announcement had stirred up. Somewhere over the past few months, Sophie had become more than just Marcus's nurse. She'd become a friend, a confidant, and if Cole were being completely honest with himself, something more than that. He'd been careful not to examine those feelings too closely, telling himself that any attraction he felt was simply the result of isolation and loneliness. But the thought of Sophie leaving felt like losing something precious before he'd even admitted to wanting it. The next few days passed with an undercurrent of tension that the children seemed to sense even though Cole tried to maintain their normal routines. Lily asked twice if Sophie was coming back, and Emma had started including her in her bedtime prayers, along with requests for new dolls and world peace. Cole found himself checking the driveway more often than usual, hoping to see Sophie's SUV kicking up dust as it approached the house. When she finally did return, 3 days later than her usual schedule, Cole felt relief flood through him so intensely that he had to sit down. "I'm sorry I'm late," Sophie said as she gathered her medical bag from the back seat. "I had a family emergency that kept me in Missoula longer than expected." She looked tired, Cole noticed, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of stress and long hours. His first instinct was to offer comfort, to ask what had happened and how he could help, but he wasn't sure he had the right to such personal questions. During dinner, Sophie seemed distracted, participating in the conversation, but not with her usual enthusiasm. The children noticed too, their own chatter becoming more subdued as they picked up on the adult tension they couldn't understand. After the meal, Cole walked Sophie out to her car earlier than usual, sensing that she needed space to process whatever was troubling her. They stood beside her SUV in the cooling evening air, and Cole could see her struggling with something she wanted to say. "My mother had a heart attack," Sophie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's okay. She's going to recover fully. But it reminded me how precious time is, how important it is to be close to the people you care about." Cole felt his heart sink as he realized where this conversation was heading. "You're going to take the job in Billings." Sophie looked up at him, and in the fading light, Cole could see tears glittering in her eyes. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "Part of me thinks I should take the hospital position, be more available for my family. But another part of me feels like I'm just getting started with the work that really matters." Without thinking, Cole reached out and touched her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that felt natural despite the careful distance they'd maintained over the months of her visits. "What does your heart tell you to do?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, and Cole could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on both of them. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft, he had to lean down to hear her. "My heart tells me that I've never felt more at home anywhere than I do right here with your family. But I'm scared that's just wishful thinking." Cole's breath caught in his throat as he processed the implications of her words. The careful boundaries they'd maintained, the professional distance that had allowed their friendship to flourish without complications, suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. "Sophie," he began, not sure what he wanted to say, but knowing that this moment required honesty, even if it led to awkwardness or rejection. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold their entire shared history, every conversation, every moment of laughter, every small kindness that had passed between them over the months of her visits. "I know this is complicated," she said. "I know there are professional boundaries and practical considerations, and a dozen reasons why it might not work. But I can't make this decision without telling you how I feel." Cole felt his world shift beneath his feet, all his careful plans for maintaining their friendship without risking anything deeper, suddenly irrelevant. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been waiting my whole life to find a place where I belong," Sophie said simply. "Like these past few months have been the happiest I've ever been. Like the thought of leaving makes me physically sick." Cole reached up and cupped her face gently in his massive hands, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his palms. "Then don't leave," he whispered. The kiss that followed was soft and tentative at first, a question asked and answered without words. But as Sophie's arms wound around his neck and Cole pulled her closer, it deepened into something that felt like coming home and starting an adventure at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers and tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. "What about your mother?" he asked. "Your family? Billings is only 3 hours away," Sophie said. "Close enough to help when she needs me, far enough to build my own life. And there are plenty of rural communities in this area that could use a traveling nurse." Over the next hour, they talked through the practical considerations that would shape their future if they decided to pursue the feelings that had been building between them for months. Sophie could establish a practice based out of Cole's town, serving families across a broader region than she'd been covering. Cole could continue running the ranch while providing Sophie with a home base for her work. But more than logistics, they talked about dreams and fears, about the children and how this change might affect them, about the risks of building a life together after knowing each other for such a short time. "The kids adore you," Cole said as they sat on his front porch swing. Sophie curled against his side in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. "But I want to make sure we're not moving too fast for them. They've had enough disruption in their lives." Sophie nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that shaped every decision Cole made. "We could take things slowly. I could continue the traveling work for now, just be around more often. Let them get used to the idea gradually." They talked until well after midnight, planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. When Sophie finally left, it was with the understanding that she would decline the hospital position and instead explore the possibility of establishing her own practice in their region. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls and research as Sophie investigated the legal and practical requirements for setting up as an independent nurse practitioner in rural Montana. Cole found himself offering support in ways that felt natural despite the newness of their romantic relationship, helping her research office space in town and connecting her with other local healthcare providers who might serve as referral sources. The children accepted the news of Sophie's decision to stay in the area with the easy adaptability that Cole both envied and treasured. To them, it simply meant more visits from someone they'd grown to love, more opportunities to share their daily adventures and seek comfort when scraped knees or hurt feelings required adult intervention. As summer faded into autumn, Sophie established a routine that allowed her to maintain her traveling practice while spending more time at the ranch. She rented a small apartment in town, but found herself staying over at Cole's house more often than not, falling asleep to the sound of cattle settling for the night and waking to the smell of coffee brewing and children arguing over breakfast cereals. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Cole had grown accustomed to making every decision about the children's lives independently, and learning to consult with Sophie about everything from bedtime routines to discipline strategies required constant attention and occasional difficult conversations. Sophie, meanwhile, had to adjust to being part of a family unit after years of maintaining professional distance from the family she served. But the rewards far outweighed the difficulties. Cole discovered that sharing the daily burdens of parenting made them lighter rather than more complicated. Sophie's medical background proved invaluable for the dozens of minor injuries and illnesses that seemed to plague active children, and her calm presence during crisis moments helped Cole respond with patience rather than panic. More than that, though, Sophie brought joy back into their household in ways Cole hadn't realized they'd been missing. She organized family game nights and taught the children to make cookies from scratch. She helped with homework without taking over, encouraged their individual interests while fostering family unity, and somehow managed to be both a parental figure and a friend to each child according to their needs. One evening in late October, as the first snow of the season dusted the mountain peaks visible from their kitchen window, Cole found Sophie sitting at the table with a stack of adoption papers spread before her. The children were upstairs getting ready for bed, their voices carrying down the hallway as they negotiated over toothbrush privileges and bedtime story selections. "What's all this?" Cole asked, settling into the chair beside her and trying to make sense of the legal documents. Sophie looked up at him with an expression that mixed nervousness with hope. "I've been thinking about what it would mean to truly become part of this family. Not just someone who lives here and helps out, but someone with legal responsibilities and rights." Cole felt his heart rate accelerate as he began to understand what she was suggesting. "You want to adopt them?" "I want us to adopt them together," Sophie corrected. "I know we're not married, and I know it's complicated, but these children deserve to have two parents who are completely committed to their well-being. I want to be their mother in every sense of the word." The tears that sprang to Cole's eyes took him by surprise. For 5 years, he'd carried the weight of sole responsibility for 3 young lives, making every decision alone and second-guessing himself constantly. The idea of sharing that responsibility with someone who loved the children as much as he did felt like the answer to prayers he hadn't known how to voice. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It's not just babysitting or helping out. It's 18 years minimum, probably longer. It's college tuition and wedding expenses and grandchildren who'll call you grandma." Sophie reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said simply. That night, they called the children downstairs for a family meeting that would reshape all their futures. Sitting in their living room with 3 young faces looking at them expectantly, Cole and Sophie explained their intentions in age-appropriate terms, emphasizing that nothing would change about their daily life, except that Sophie would officially become their mother. The responses were as individual as the children themselves. Lily, ever practical, wanted to know if this meant Sophie would be signing school permission slips and attending parent-teacher conferences. Marcus asked if he could call her mom, or if that would make his birth mother sad. Emma, characteristically, wanted to know if this meant they could have a wedding with cake. The adoption process took several months to complete, involving home studies and background checks, and reams of paperwork that seemed designed to test their commitment through sheer bureaucratic endurance. But finally, on a cold February morning, they stood before a judge who declared that Sophie Hale was now the legal mother of Lily, Marcus, and Emma Whitaker. The celebration that followed was small but perfect. Just their little family and a few close friends gathered at the ranch house for cake, and the kind of laughter that comes from joy too big to contain. As Cole watched Sophie help Emma blow out the candles on a cake decorated with horses and flowers, he marveled at how completely their lives had been transformed. That evening, after the last guest had gone home and the children were asleep, Cole and Sophie sat on their front porch swing and talked about the future they were building together. Sophie's practice had grown to include families across 3 counties, her reputation for compassionate care spreading through word of mouth in the way that good news traveled in rural communities. She'd hired 2 other traveling nurses to help manage the caseload, and they were considering opening a small clinic in town to serve as headquarters for their expanding operation. The ranch, too, was thriving under their combined management. Sophie's organizational skills had helped Cole streamline his record-keeping and develop more efficient systems for tracking everything from vaccination schedules to feed costs. Her medical background proved invaluable during calving season, when her ability to recognize signs of distress in both animals and humans made the difference between successful births and potential disasters. But more than professional success, they created something neither had expected to find. A family built not just on love, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of daily partnership that made even difficult moments manageable. As spring arrived and brought with it the annual cycle of ranch renewal, Cole found himself thinking often about his brother Jake and what he might think of the life they'd built in his absence. The children still visited Jake's grave on his birthday and the anniversary of his death, bringing wildflowers from the pasture and stories about their achievements and adventures. Sophie had never tried to replace their father in their memories, instead helping them understand that loving her didn't diminish their love for the parents they'd lost. One warm afternoon in May, as Cole watched Marcus help with the spring branding, while Lily kept detailed records, and Emma appointed herself chief encourager for the nervous calves, he realized that grief and joy weren't opposites, but rather companions that could coexist in the same heart. Jake would never see his children grow up, would never meet the woman who'd completed their family, would never know how his death had ultimately led to a kind of healing none of them could have imagined. but his presence lived on in the values he'd instilled, the ranch he'd helped build, and the love that had multiplied rather than divided when shared among more people. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table that Jake had built with his own hands, Cole looked at the faces surrounding him and felt a gratitude so profound it took his breath away. Sophie was helping Emma practice reading while simultaneously listening to Lily's detailed report of the day's branding activities. Marcus was demonstrating his improved flexibility by reaching across the table for the salt without any trace of the pain that had once limited his movement. They were not the same family they'd been before Sophie's arrival, and Cole was grateful for that transformation. They'd grown from a group of people united by tragedy and necessity into something richer and more resilient, a chosen family built on love, commitment, and the daily decision to show up for each other regardless of circumstances. After dinner, while the children worked on homework and argued over television privileges, Cole found Sophie in the kitchen washing dishes and humming softly to herself. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against his larger frame. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Sophie leaned back against his chest, her hands still working methodically through the soapy water. "I was thinking about that first night I came here," she said. "How nervous you were, how carefully you'd arranged everything to make the house presentable for company." Cole chuckled, remembering his frantic cleaning and the way he'd second-guessed every decision about what to serve for dinner. "I wanted to make a good impression." "You did," Sophie said, turning in his arms to face him. "But not because of the clean house or the perfectly prepared meal. You made a good impression because of how much you obviously loved those children. How hard you were trying to give them everything they needed, even when you weren't sure you knew what that was." She reached up and cupped his face in her damp hands, her green eyes serious as she studied his features. "That's what made me want to keep coming back. Not just Marcus's medical needs, but seeing a man who was willing to sacrifice everything for the children who'd been entrusted to his care." Cole felt emotion tighten his throat as he processed her words. For 5 years before Sophie's arrival, he'd questioned every decision, wondered constantly if he was doing right by Jake's children, feared that his best efforts would never be enough to replace what they'd lost. To hear Sophie affirm not just his efforts, but the love that motivated them, felt like receiving absolution for sins he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "I love you," he said, the words carrying weight beyond simple affection. "I love the life we've built together, the family we've become. I can't imagine any of this without you anymore." Sophie's smile was radiant, transforming her entire face with joy that seemed to originate from somewhere deep within her soul. "I love you too," she replied. "All of you. This whole beautiful, chaotic, perfect life we've created together." That night, as they tucked each child into bed with the rituals that had evolved over months of shared parenting, Cole felt a peace he'd never experienced before. Emma's bedtime story, complete with voices for all the characters, Marcus's review of the day's accomplishments and tomorrow's goals, Lily's request for extra prayers for a friend who was struggling with family problems. Each interaction was a thread in the fabric of their family life, ordinary moments that accumulated into something extraordinary. Later, as he and Sophie lay in bed listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling around them, Cole thought about the future they were building together. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. The children would grow and change, testing boundaries and asserting independence in ways that would require constant adaptation. The ranch would face good years and bad years, market fluctuations and weather disasters that would test their resilience. Sophie's practice would continue to evolve, bringing new opportunities and responsibilities that would require careful balance with their family commitments. But for the first time since Jake's death, Cole felt confident in his ability to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. Not because he'd become a better man or a more capable parent, but because he no longer had to face those challenges alone. Sophie's presence in their lives had transformed not just their daily routines, but their capacity to weather storms and celebrate victories as a united family. The next morning brought the kind of crisis that had once sent Cole into panic mode. Marcus woke with a fever and stomach complaints that might have been simple flu or could have indicated something more serious. But instead of the familiar spiral of anxiety and second-guessing, Cole found himself working calmly with Sophie to assess the situation and develop a care plan. Within hours, Sophie had determined that Marcus was dealing with a routine stomach bug that would require nothing more than rest, fluids, and careful monitoring. She adjusted her day's schedule to work from home, setting up her laptop at the kitchen table where she could handle phone consultations with other patients while keeping an eye on Marcus's recovery. Watching Sophie seamlessly integrate her professional responsibilities with their family needs, Cole marveled again at how completely she'd embraced her role as mother and partner. She'd given up the independence and flexibility of her traveling lifestyle to become part of their complicated, demanding, deeply rewarding family life, and she seemed to thrive on the challenges rather than resent the sacrifices. That afternoon, while Marcus napped and the girls were at school, Cole and Sophie sat on the front porch with cups of coffee and talked about their dreams for the future. The ranch was finally profitable enough to consider some of the improvements Jake had always wanted to make. Sophie's practice was successful enough to think about expanding services or training additional staff. The children were thriving academically and socially, growing into the kind of young people who made their parents proud. "Sometimes I feel guilty about how happy we are," Sophie admitted, her voice soft as she watched cattle graze in the distance. "Like we don't deserve this kind of contentment, after everything the children have been through." Cole reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "I used to think the same thing," he said. "But I've come to believe that happiness isn't something we earn or deserve. It's something we create through the choices we make every day. The choice to love each other, to show up for each other, to build something beautiful together, even when the foundation starts with loss." End quote. As summer approached and brought with it the anniversary of Jake's death, Cole prepared for the emotional difficulty that date always carried. But this year felt different, colored by gratitude rather than dominated by grief. They would still visit the cemetery, still share memories, and shed tears for the man who'd been taken too soon. But they would do it as a complete family, with Sophie's strength adding to their collective ability to honor the past while embracing the present. The night before the anniversary, Cole found himself in Jake's old workshop, running his hands over tools that hadn't been used in years. Sophie found him there, sitting on a workbench and staring at plans Jake had drawn for a treehouse he'd never had the chance to build. "What would you think about finishing this project?" Cole asked, showing Sophie the detailed sketches his brother had made. "I think the kids would love having a treehouse, and it feels like a good way to honor Jake's memory." Sophie studied the plans carefully, her practical mind already working through the logistics of construction and safety considerations. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said finally. "But I think we should include the children in the building process. Make it a family project that creates new memories while honoring old ones." Over the following weeks, the treehouse became the focus of their summer evenings and weekend mornings. Marcus proved surprisingly adept with basic carpentry skills, his attention to detail reminiscent of his father's careful approach to any project. Lily appointed herself project manager, keeping detailed records of their progress and ensuring that everyone had assigned tasks. Emma contributed artistic touches and endless enthusiasm, painting decorative elements and declaring each day's accomplishments to be the most exciting developments in the history of treehouses. Sophie threw herself into the project with characteristic dedication, researching construction techniques and safety requirements, while also managing the practical aspects of keeping 3 children engaged and productive without letting anyone get hurt. Her presence transformed what could have been a nostalgic tribute to Jake into something more dynamic, a living celebration of family creativity and cooperation. Cole watched his family work together on Jake's design and felt his brother's presence in ways that comforted rather than saddened him. This was what Jake had wanted for his children. Not just survival after his death, but the kind of rich, full life that included adventure and creativity and the security of being deeply loved. When the treehouse was finally completed in late July, they celebrated with a family camping trip that included the first official sleepover in their new creation. As Cole listened to the children's excited chatter drifting down from their elevated hideaway, he felt Jake's approval as clearly as if his brother had spoken the words aloud. That autumn brought new challenges as Lily entered middle school and began navigating the complex social dynamics that came with pre-adolescence. Sophie proved invaluable during this transition, helping Lily understand the physical and emotional changes she was experiencing, while also supporting Cole as he struggled with his own discomfort about his little routine. Girl growing up. Marcus, now fully recovered from his leg injury, joined the school's soccer team and discovered a natural athletic ability that reminded Cole of Jake's own coordination and competitive spirit. Sophie never missed a game, cheering from the sidelines with the kind of enthusiasm that embarrassed and delighted Marcus in equal measure. Emma started kindergarten with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted that she was loved and supported. Her teacher commented on her unusual maturity and kindness toward other children, qualities that Cole and Sophie recognized as products of being raised in a household where emotional intelligence was valued as highly as academic achievement. As winter settled over the ranch again, Cole reflected on the transformation their family had undergone since Sophie's first visit nearly 2 years earlier. They'd moved from survival mode to thriving, from a collection of individuals united by tragedy to a chosen family built on love, respect, and shared commitment to each other's well-being. The challenges hadn't disappeared. There were still difficult days when grief surfaced unexpectedly, when parenting decisions required careful negotiation between two strong-willed adults, when the demands of ranch life and medical practice threatened to overwhelm their carefully maintained balance. But they faced those challenges together now, with the kind of partnership that made even difficult moments manageable. One snowy evening in December, as they sat around the fireplace that Jake had built during his last winter on the ranch, Cole looked at the faces illuminated by flickering flames and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Sophie was helping Emma with a school project while simultaneously reviewing patient files. Lily was reading a book for her advanced literature class, occasionally sharing particularly interesting passages with the rest of the family. Marcus was working on a model airplane, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he attached delicate pieces with steady hands. It was an ordinary moment in an extraordinary life, the kind of scene that might be forgotten by morning, but somehow contained all the love and hope and daily miracle of family life. Cole committed it to memory anyway, knowing that these were the moments Jake would have treasured, the simple evidence that his children were not just surviving, but thriving in ways that honored his love while creating new traditions and memories. As bedtime approached and the familiar evening routines began, Cole helped Sophie tuck each child into bed with the rituals that had evolved to include both their different parenting styles and the children's individual needs. These moments of connection, repeated night after night, had become the foundation of their family life, proof that love could indeed be multiplied rather than divided when shared among more people. Later, as he and Sophie lay in bed planning the next day's activities and discussing the children's various needs and schedules, Cole marveled again at how completely she'd integrated herself into every aspect of their complicated life. She knew which breakfast cereal each child preferred, which friend's birthday party was coming up next weekend, which homework assignment was causing anxiety, and which achievement deserved special celebration. More than that, she'd helped Cole become a better parent by example and encouragement, showing him that uncertainty and mistakes were part of the process rather than evidence of failure. Her confidence in his abilities had helped him develop confidence in himself, transforming his approach to parenting from defensive anxiety to proactive engagement. "Do you ever regret giving up the traveling work?" Cole asked as they settled into the comfortable positions that had become natural over months of sharing a bed and a life. Sophie was quiet for a moment, and Cole could feel her considering the question seriously, rather than offering an automatic reassurance. "I miss some aspects of it," she said finally. "The variety, the feeling of making a difference in places where resources are limited. But I wouldn't trade what we have here for anything. This is the life I was meant to live, with the people I was meant to love." Her words carried the weight of certainty earned through experience, rather than hope based on wishful thinking. Sophie had chosen their family deliberately, with full knowledge of what that choice would require, and she'd never shown signs of regretting that decision even during the most challenging moments of their adjustment period. As spring returned to the ranch, and brought with it another cycle of renewal and growth, Cole began planning a surprise that had been forming in his mind for months. With Sophie's adoption of the children now complete, and their life together clearly established as permanent, he wanted to make their commitment official in every possible way. The engagement ring he'd secretly purchased was nothing elaborate, just a simple diamond set in gold that reflected Sophie's practical nature while acknowledging the significance of the moment. He'd planned to propose during a quiet evening at home, but as he watched Sophie teach Emma how to braid dandelions into chains, while Marcus and Lily worked together to repair a section of fence, Cole realized that the perfect moment wasn't something to be planned, but something to be recognized when it arrived. That evening, after dinner and homework and the 1,000 small tasks that filled their days, Cole asked Sophie to walk with him to the oak tree, where Jake used to read stories to his children. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed designed to celebrate new beginnings, and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night provided a peaceful soundtrack to the most important conversation of Cole's life. "Sophie," he began, then found himself tongue-tied in a way that surprised him. He'd been practicing this speech for weeks, but standing here with the woman who'd transformed their lives so completely, words seemed inadequate to express everything he wanted to say. Sophie seemed to sense the importance of the moment even before Cole pulled the ring box from his pocket. Her eyes widened with surprise and joy as he dropped to one knee beside the tree that held so many memories of his brother's love for his children. "I know we're already a family in every way that matters," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want to make it official. I want everyone to know that you're my wife, my partner, my choice, for every day, for the rest of our lives. Sophie Hale, will you marry me?" The tears that sprang to Sophie's eyes were answer enough, but she nodded vigorously before throwing her arms around his neck and nearly knocking him over with the force of her enthusiasm. "Yes," she whispered against his ear. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring fit perfectly, which Cole took as confirmation that they were meant to be together in ways that went beyond simple compatibility or attraction. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, discussing wedding plans and timeline and all the practical details that would shape their future, Cole felt Jake's presence more strongly than he had since those first dark days after the accident. His brother would have loved Sophie, Cole realized. Jake would have appreciated her kindness toward his children, her dedication to serving families who needed medical care, her ability to bring joy and laughter into their household. Most of all, Jake would have been grateful that his children had found someone who loved them completely, unconditionally, with the kind of maternal devotion that couldn't be faked or forced. The wedding planning process became a family affair, with each child taking on responsibilities according to their interests and abilities. Lily threw herself into researching venues and coordinating logistics with the kind of organizational enthusiasm that reminded Cole of Sophie's own systematic approach to complex projects. Marcus appointed himself keeper of the guest list, carefully considering which neighbors and friends should be included in their celebration. Emma focused on the artistic elements, drawing elaborate plans for decorations, and insisting that the ceremony should include horses because weddings are supposed to have beautiful things, and horses are the most beautiful things ever. They decided to hold the ceremony at the ranch, in the pasture where Jake used to teach his children to ride their first ponies. Sophie's family would travel from across the state to attend, and Cole's extended family, scattered across various ranches throughout Montana, would gather to welcome Sophie officially into the clan that had accepted her presence long before any legal formalities were completed. As the wedding date approached, Cole found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years earlier, he'd been a grieving brother trying desperately to fill a role he'd never expected to play, uncertain whether love and good intentions would be enough to raise 3 traumatized children. Now he was preparing to marry a woman who'd not only helped him become a better parent, but had also shown him that it was possible to build happiness on a foundation of loss. The night before the wedding, as Cole lay in bed listening to Sophie's quiet breathing beside him and the familiar night sounds of the ranch settling around them, he felt a peace that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep within his soul. Tomorrow they would make official promises they'd already been keeping for more than a year, but the ceremony would mark a new chapter in their ongoing story of chosen family and deliberate love. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, with the kind of perfect Montana sky that made everything seem possible. Sophie had spent the night at her friend's house in town, maintaining the traditional separation that Emma had insisted was very important for good luck, leaving Cole to wake up alone for the first time in months. As he went through his morning routines and helped the children prepare for their roles in the ceremony, Cole felt the kind of anticipation that came with knowing something wonderful was about to happen. The children were excited beyond containment, racing around the house in their wedding clothes and checking every few minutes to make sure all the preparations were proceeding according to their carefully laid plans. When Sophie's car finally appeared at the end of the driveway, Cole felt his heart rate accelerate in ways that reminded him of their first kiss months earlier. She emerged from the passenger seat wearing a simple white dress that managed to be both elegant and practical, perfectly suited to an outdoor wedding at a working ranch. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls that framed her face, and her smile was radiant enough to compete with the Montana sunshine. The ceremony itself was everything they'd hoped it would be. Intimate enough to feel personal, festive enough to mark the significance of the occasion, and distinctly their own in ways that reflected the unconventional path that had brought them together. Emma scattered wildflower petals with artistic flair, while Marcus served as ring-bearer with the kind of serious dignity that made Cole proud. Lily read a poem about chosen families that left most of the adults dabbing at their eyes. When the minister asked if they would take each other as husband and wife, Cole felt the weight of that promise in ways that went beyond the legal formalities. This wasn't just a wedding, but a public declaration of the life they'd already been building together, a commitment to continue facing whatever challenges and celebrating whatever joys the future might bring as partners in every sense of the word. Sophie's vows, delivered in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the assembled crowd, spoke of love that grew from respect, family built from choice rather than obligation, and commitment to stand together through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that would shape their shared future. Cole's own vows, carefully written and rewritten over several weeks, but ultimately delivered from the heart rather than from the paper in his pocket, promised to honor the trust Sophie had shown by choosing their complicated, demanding, deeply rewarding life together. When they finally kissed, as husband and wife, the cheers from their assembled friends and family were nearly drowned out by the enthusiastic celebration from three children who understood that this moment made permanent the family structure they'd come to depend on and love her now. The reception that followed was held in the same pasture where the ceremony had taken place, with tables arranged under the oak trees and a dance floor constructed from plywood sheets that Marcus had helped Cole paint the wee crow. Before, the food was provided by local families who'd insisted on contributing to the celebration, and the music came from a neighbor who played guitar and harmonica with the kind of skill that made even simple songs sound special. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Cole and Sophie found themselves stealing moments alone together, overwhelmed by gratitude for the community that had embraced their union and the family they'd created together. The children danced with abandon, their joy infectious enough to pull even the most reluctant adults onto the makeshift dance floor. When it came time for the bouquet toss, Sophie made sure to aim carefully so that 10-year-old Lily would have a chance to catch the flowers, a gesture that sent the girl into raptures of delight and prompted whispered conversations about when she might be old enough to have her own wedding. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift toward their cars, Cole and Sophie stood on their front porch and watched their friends and neighbors head home, carrying with them memories of a day that had been everything a wedding should be. A celebration of love, commitment, and the promise of shared tomorrows. The children, exhausted from excitement and sugar, had already been tucked into bed by Sophie's sister, who'd volunteered to handle bedtime duties so the newlyweds could enjoy the last hours of their wedding day without tumor. Parental responsibilities. Standing together on the porch where they'd shared so many important conversations over the past 2 years, Cole and Sophie looked out at the ranch that had been the setting for their entire courtship and would continue to be the foundation of their married life. The pastures stretched away in all directions, dotted with cattle that represented both their livelihood and their connection to the land that had shaped Cole's family for generations. "No regrets?" Cole asked, pulling Sophie closer against his side as the evening air carried the scent of hay and wildflowers. "Not a single one," Sophie replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I belong, with exactly the right people. I couldn't be happier." As they stood together watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Cole thought about all the moments that had led them to this point. Sophie's first nervous visit to check on Marcus's injury. The gradual development of friendship that had grown into love so naturally they barely noticed the transition. The decision to blend their lives completely, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. Their story wasn't the fairy tale romance that movies and books often portrayed, but it was something better. A real love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the daily choice to prioritize each other's happiness alongside their own. They'd created a family from the ashes of tragedy, finding joy without dishonoring grief, building hope without ignoring the fragility of all human connections. Tomorrow would bring the ordinary responsibilities that shaped their life together. Children to feed and dress and send off to school, medical appointments to keep, cattle to tend, bills to pay, and all the thousand small tasks that accumulated into a life well lived. But tonight was for celebration, for acknowledging the miraculous transformation that had occurred when a traveling nurse had arrived at their ranch and decided to stay not just for the work, but for the love she'd found in the CS. Most unexpected place. As they finally went inside to begin their first night as husband and wife, Cole carried with him the absolute certainty that their story was far from over. There would be new challenges to face, new joys to celebrate, and new chapters to write in the ongoing story of the Whitaker family. But whatever the future brought, they would face it together, with the kind of love that multiplied when shared, and the commitment to keep choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. The giant cowboy who had once struggled to raise his brother's orphan children alone had found his perfect partner, and together they had created something neither could have imagined. A chosen family built on love, dedication, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the best things in life come to those who are brave enough to open their hearts to unexpected possibilities.